This video contains spoilers for the following Final Fantasy XIV expansion packs: A Realm Reborn, Stormblood, Shadowbringers, and Endwalker. From Gridania, I left the Blue Badger Gate and took the road south, through the emerald canopy of the Jadeite Thick. The road guided me onwards, dirt paths giving way to a rope bridge once I reached the Root Slate Marsh. There, I did my utmost to ignore the myriad vilekin that filled the wet air with the chorus of their wings, biting and tearing at my skin. My stalwart horsebird, at least, was not so easily disturbed by the marsh denizens, and he pressed on, heedless of the winged fiends tormenting us. Once I reached the Welwick Wood on the southern fringes of the Black Shroud, I could already feel the air becoming drier, hotter, and the lush canopy of green leaves giving way to a clear sky and blazing sun. Thanalan was near. At the high bridge that spanned the bottomless chasm, I could already see the dark silhouette of my destination on the far horizon. I continued west. I heeded the warnings of a man named Hellheart at the high bridge, and stocked up on what provisions I could. Nothing could truly prepare me for the harsh, beating glare of the Thanalan sun. Already, the towering woods of Gridania seemed like a distant memory, and all around me, as far as the eye could see, was naught but some shrubs, hardy grasses, and a handful of withered trees, and stray flocks of surly goats. All else was parched, dusty earth. At Camp Drybone, the only spot of civilization for what felt like countless malms, I was able to catch a night's rest and a cool drink before pressing on. It would not be long now, I thought to myself, as I urged my horsebird onward south, then west. One last stretch of road took me round an oasis, in the middle of which was a rock formation in the shape of a great mushroom. Then I arrived at Blackbrush Station. On a whim, while I was giving my steed a much-needed brushing and watering, I happened to look up. And there, before my very eyes, glimmering like golden stars against the night sky, was Ul'Dah. Ul'Dah, the jewel city of the Thanalan Desert. Watched over by Nalthal, the two-aspected god of wealth and the afterlife, it is a city of stone, brick, and gold built upon the sands. It is a city that understands the value of things, the value of goods, deals, services, coin, opportunity. Walk the streets of its markets, and you will see its opulence, a realm where gold flows more freely than water. There are few things on this star that are not sold in its Sapphire Avenue exchange, or so its people say, and that which you cannot find there will make its way there eventually, one way or another, by the ambition of its clever merchants. In a city where the only true limit is the depth of one's treasure vaults, some may find Ul'Dah their favorite city-state in Eorzea, lacking the anarchy of Limsa Lominsa, the restrictiveness of Gridania, the hostility towards outsiders of Ishgard, and the scars of war borne by Alamigo. Those who are rich might live like kings in this oasis of gold, if not better, shaded from the merciless rays of the Thanalan sun beneath its gilded boughs. But there are two sides to the coin that is Ul'Dah. Where there is abundance, there is also poverty. For those blessed with coin, there are few limits, but for those without, there are few comforts. Ul'Dah and its people are rich, yes, but charity is a treasure that is difficult to find there, particularly not when refugees, hearing of the city's wealth, flock to its gates for succor. The city's motto, for coin and country, makes a visitor wonder whether the former is more highly considered by its people than the latter. Ul'Dah is a city that understands the value of things. Thus, that which has little value are cast aside like refuse. The tale of Ul'Dah begins in the 5th Astral Era. More than 16 centuries past stood the great city of Mach, the masters of the destructive art of black magic, in what is now the Yafaemi Salt Moor, west of Mordona. It stood above its rival city-states, having laid them low one by one over the course of decades of ceaseless war and ravenous use of magic. But then, just as Mach reached out with its hand to grasp the reins of final victory, the land's ether, long abused by the war between Magi, at last fell out of balance, and the resulting Sixth Umbral Calamity drowned Eorzea in an apocalyptic torrent of water. Not all were doomed to die in that catastrophe. Some handfuls of survivors managed to persevere by retreating to what high ground there was. One such group was a band of Lalafell, and as they fled, they carried with them the last embers of the sorcerous arts of Mach. These mages were forced to keep their arcane prowess a secret, for by then the realm had realized that it was the reckless use of magic that nearly destroyed the continent, and would mete out retribution to any spellweaver they could find. For several centuries they endured, remembering their legacy even as they kept it hidden, until at last the realm forgot who it was that drowned the world. Some 700 years after the beginning of the Sixth Era, the children of Mach came to the deserts of Thanalan, and in 37 years they set the foundations of a new city. Belladia, they called it. There they built their shining thrones, sitting beneath the sigil of the traitor's scale, one arm bearing the fruit of knowledge, and the other bearing the flame of magic. From this shining seat did the royal sultans of Belladia rule their fair city. So it stood, for 230 long years. Once, a band of Huron marauders sought to sack Belladia, but they were repulsed. One sultan, Lalafuto III, is said to have vanished under mysterious circumstances, soon replaced by his wife, Memeto. Beyond such occurrences, however, the history scrolls suggest that Belladia enjoyed some measure of peace, until its final days. Perhaps it is the fate of all kings to have their thrones be squabbled over by their sons, like so much scavengers over carrion. Such was the end of Belladia when its last ailing sultan failed to pick an heir, leaving Prince Sasagan and Prince Sasawefu to fall into a bitter dispute that, in time, became a war. The two princes, seemingly so hateful of one another that they could not bear to live in the same realm as the other, each built their own cities, Sasawefu founding Ul'Dah, and Sasagan founding Ul'Dah. Perhaps as a symbol of their newfound enmity, and a demonstration that the old unity of Belladia was well and truly dead, each prince created a new banner. Ul'Dah would take the sigil of the Fruit of Knowledge and add to it the Helm of Might, while Ul'Dah took the sigil of the Flame of Magic and added the Gem of Affluence, thus leaving one brother city the strength of the sword arm while the other kept their mastery over the sorcerous arts. And so, with the father dead and brother set against brother, the cities of Ul'Dah and Ul'Dah quickly fell to war, going so far as to weaponize aetheryte teleportation against one another in devastating ambushes. For all the blood they spilled, however, neither Ul'Dah nor Ul'Dah could gain a decisive advantage. Tiring of the fighting, the two princes had their armies stand down, and for the next 2 centuries, Thanalan simmered with an uneasy peace. The beginning of the end was ushered in by the enthronement of one Lalawefu Sil Tatawefu, Sultan of Ul'Dah. Seeking to reform the economy of his city, he levied heavy taxes upon his people, a policy that might have resulted in revolt had he not also found a new source of water for his thirsty populace, thereby earning the title the King of Springs. But the King of Springs did not conjure up his new waters from an empty wasteland. No, he had, in truth, diverted a waterway lying upstream of Ul'Dah's own water reservoir. By granting more life-giving water to his people, he had in turn seized it from his city's nemesis. According to the records, Ul'Dah did not appear to have retaliated immediately. Perhaps they did not realize who the culprit behind their water theft was at first. Or perhaps they did not discover the disruption to their water source until a drought struck the region some 15 years after Lalawefu's act. Regardless, when Lalawefu succumbed to illness and a drought drank the waters dry, Ul'Dah weakened as its people protested against the many taxes their old sultan had levied upon them for his reforms. It was then that Ul'Dah took the opportunity to strike. According to official histories, Sasagan ul-Sisigan III, Sultan of Ul'Dah, launched an assault upon Ul'Dah, ostensibly to reclaim its stolen water and thus plunge Thanalan into conflict once more. The new war ground on for years, consuming flesh and coin like a hungry, bottomless maw, and no doubt it seemed it would have no decisive end, just as the war that gave birth to the two cities that fought it. Perhaps it was the elite of Ul'Dah who chafed the most at this stalemate. It is said that they, having only recently nursed the strained coffers of their sultanate back to health, were desperate for any solution to bring the war to an end. And so they turned to arts most sinister, most foul. They would have the dead of Ul'Dah rise and fight once more. One day, in the midst of the war, the Walking Dead marched upon Ul'Dah's legions, who no doubt fought the terror in their hearts as much as they fought their bloodless foes. Soon, however, whatever dark means Ul'Dah used to bolster their forces ran amok, turning against those who raised them from beyond the mortal coil. Ul'Dah sealed the city in response to ensure that whatever foul magics animating the dead could not spread out into the rest of Thanalan, trapping both the undead and the living of Ul'Dah within its own walls. How long the screaming lasted, we do not know. How the soldiers of Ul'Dah felt as the cries for aid fell silent one by one, only to be replaced with moans that came from dead lips, we do not know. The histories say that Sasagan would not stand idly by and let this plague of undeath haunt his realm, and so, gathering his elite warriors to his side and naming them the Immortal Flames, he marched into the dead city and put every abomination he found there to the sword. In time, Ul'Dah was purged, and with its entire population dead, or worse, it was now forever consigned to the dust of history. No doubt the taste of victory was sweet on Sasagan's lips, but it did not last forever. 40 years after Sasagan's triumph over Ul'Dah's most hated foe, a man named Baldur Thorn confronted the aging sultan and denounced him. Sasagan demanded Thorn be immediately arrested, but Thorn was popular, and the weight of Sasagan's crime was evidently so great that he immediately lost his power, spending the rest of his days in Ul'Dah's dungeons. Ul'Dah still needed a sultan, however, and the people clamored for Thorn's ascension. Baldur, for his part, humbly declined, instead taking on the role as a sort of steward for the city, keeping the throne safe and prepared for when the royal house of Ul was ready to rule once more. His reign, and the reign of House Thorn, was said to have been a peaceful and prosperous one. One must wonder, what did Baldur Thorn say to Sasagan ul-Sisigan that fateful day? What words could he have spoken? What threats did he make? What crimes could he have laid at Sasagan's feet that could cast down a sultan from his throne? The sultan, who destroyed Ul'Dah forever, no less. The records speak little, and their abruptness and vagueness bring to mind a concerted attempt by Ul'Dah to cover some sort of shameful past. Beyond this is the provenance of rumors and secret truths, perhaps a tale for another time. Regardless, the interim reign of House Thorn is remembered with fondness. It was in this time that House Thorn moved the city of Ul'Dah from its original foundations, as built by Sasagan I upon the breaking of Palladia, and unto its new whereabouts above the ruins of Ul'Dah, where it still sits today. House Thorn also continued the mercantile projects begun by Sasagan III shortly before his overthrow, securing the entirety of Thanalan for the city, those parts contested by the Amalja notwithstanding, and turning the fearsome pirates of Limsa Lominsa into business assets for naval trade into the east. Land trade was restored as well. Their reign would further see the establishment of the Eorzean festival of Little Ladies' Day, commemorating the incident when the sole daughter of the head of House Thorn went missing and was only found through the assistance of a common-born girl. After 129 years of wise rule, House Thorn would serve Ul'Dah as stewards one final time by allying with the Amalja to destroy a wave of undead that rose from the ruins of Sildee beneath the city, before at last declaring their duty complete and peacefully transferring the throne back to the House of Ul. Indeed, though the House of Ul founded the nation and still rules over it, it can be said that the character of today's Ul'Dah stems as much from the guidance of House Thorn as from the rule of the line of Ul. It is perhaps due to the Thorn stewardship that the next period of Ul'Dah's history is largely peaceful, a certain attempted coup by a royal princess, and the Autumn War notwithstanding. During this era of peace, Ul'Dah became the mercantile powerhouse it is today, purchasing Lominsan trade ships to ferry goods to and from Radzatan, and restoring the overland trade routes when Alamigo was forced to reduce its tolls following the Autumn War. The coffers of its merchants grew, and by the 1401st year of the Sixth Era, those merchants were granted a degree of formal political power with the founding of the Syndicate. A power they eventually exercised to, among other things, cast out the Amalja, Sylph, Kikirn, and Goblin peoples from the city, coining the infamous term Beastmen. Ul'Dah, in the final days of the Sixth Era, was much as it is now, a city of wealth and means, where coin wore the true crown, and those who possessed it ruling over those who did not, be they the destitute laborer or the impoverished refugee. Its war against Garlemald might have deflated its coffers somewhat, but at first glance, the city's love of gold endured the ending of its founding era. The city of Ul'Dah is of hewn stone and brick, its thick walls easily visible from miles away, and tall structures with rounded domes peering above its battlements, glinting under the sunlight of day and shining as a beacon in the dark of night. Its streets are as looping concentric circles between Ul'Dah's outer defenses and the colossal dome of the royal palace sitting at the heart of the city, and they are narrower than one might think given the city's size. They are less expansive thoroughfares, more valleys carved through canyons of buildings and city walls. Much of the city is either under a roof or beshadowed when the sun is low, perhaps intended by the city's designers to provide refuge from the merciless Thanalan sun, and nearly every pathway and road is paved with stone. The black and gold flag of Ul'Dah flies proudly in many parts of the city. On it is a golden scale, with one arm bearing the gem of affluence, representing Ul'Dah's prosperity, and the other bearing the flame of magic, representing its arcane might. To outsiders, the unquestioned ruler of Ul'Dah is the Sultana Nanamo Ul Namo, 17th ruler in the royal line of the House of Ul, a line that has remained unbroken for centuries. A maid of 21, the young Sultana is the realm's delight, and where Ul'Dah must conduct business with foreign heads of state, it is said that she is swift to greet others with charm and a smile. 7 divans carry out her will in matters of law, finance, engineering, the interior, commerce, war, religious affairs, and palace affairs. However, it is all an open secret that the true rulers of Ul'Dah are the Syndicate. As I have spoken of earlier in this tale, the Syndicate was originally a political body through which Ul'Dah's rising merchant class could participate in matters politic. As their wealth grew, however, they steadily chipped away at the power of the royal throne, like the constant drip of water that carves a groove through the hardest stone. With the sudden and tragic passing of Sultan Sasabal and Sultana Nanasha, the late parents of Sultana Nanamo, Their domination of the city became all but complete, with many considering the current sultana little more than a figurehead. Indeed, it is difficult to imagine how a freshly orphaned sultana, little older than age 5, could wield much power in her own name in comparison to the wealthiest men and women of the city. No doubt that these merchant lords and ladies cemented their grip over Ul'Dah during the sultana's vulnerable youth. Until somewhat recently, there were 6 members of the syndicate. Lolorito Nanarito, chairman of the East Aldenar Trading Company and the wealthiest citizen of the city. The late Teleji Adeleji, prince of the Mirage Trust. Chief foreman Fergeist Lutkipson of the Amagina and Sons Mineral Concern. Dulala Dula, prioress of the Milvaneth Sacrarium. Godbert Manderville, president of Manderville and Manderville. And Rauban Alden, Flame General of the Immortal Flames, who has since resigned his position and is taking up generalship in the newly freed Alamigo. Membership in the syndicate requires a certain degree of wealth, and its power means competition for a seat at its table is fierce. Take, for example, Eolande Quiveron, former head of the prestigious Frondale's Frontistery and ex-member of the syndicate who perished during the 7th Calamity, but whispers abound that her true demise was at the hands of an assassin, the bloody outcome of a dispute within this merchant's conclave. Few would openly question the will of the Sultana. Fewer still would dare question at all the will of the syndicate, particularly that of Lord Lolorito, whose reach, they say, is far, subtle, and ruthless. Broadly speaking, there are 3 informal factions within the syndicate: the Monetarists, the Royalists, and those who abstain from choosing either side. The Monetarists represent the interests of the wealthy merchants of Ul'Dah, while the Royalists represent the interests of the Sultana. Given that the merchants and the throne are at odds with one another, the Monetarists clash with the Royalists on many matters of policy, and all too often the Monetarists prove the victor, having leveraged their wealth against the young Sultana since her earliest years. Currently, Lord Lolorito, Prince Teleji, and Chairman Fergeist are, or were, reputed to be Monetarists, while Rauban Alden was the sole Royalist. Prioress Dulala and President Godbert are seen as supporting neither side openly, though some suppose that Manderville and Manderville is sympathetic towards the throne. The syndicate is ostensibly an advisory council, but since their founding, they have taken over much of the governance of Ul'Dah. Take, for example, how new laws of the city are written. Formally, a divan is granted the authority to legislate by the Sultana, relying on the assistance from the learned Order of Nalthal. However, as a religious body in charge of performing the sacred rites for the dead, they are ever open to donations. And if a particularly wealthy man were to make a substantial gift to the order, a man so wealthy that he wields the power of the infamous East Aldenard Company, then who is to say how this new law might be written? How heavy is the thumb of gold that rests upon the scale of justice? Would the Order ever dare advise the Divan to disfavor the wealthiest and most influential man in the city? Would the Divan dare ink such a disfavorable law upon parchment? With the resignation of General Alden from the Syndicate, it is unclear who is left on the Syndicate who could oppose the will of the monetarist faction that dominates it. Nonetheless, it is said that the Sultana these days has an air of confidence and surety about her. Perhaps she has laid her hands on the reins controlling the Syndicate. If so, then the power of the throne of Ul might stand firm for a generation yet. As for its peoples, you will surely find no greater concentration of Lalafell in Eorzea as you would in Ul'Dah. Approximately 4 in 10 of the city's non-refugee population are of Lalafellan stock, and of the Dunesfolk clan in particular. Midlander Hure form the second largest cohort, with roughly 3 out of every 10 Uldans belonging to those peoples, then Highlander Hjor and Hellsguard Rogadin at a tenth of the population each. Various other peoples form the rest. And then there are the refugees. When the city of Alamigo fell to Garlean occupation, a great many of its people took what little they could and fled, only for most to be turned aside at the gates of Gridania. Spurned by the unsympathetic will of the Twellswood's reigning deities, the Elementals, these refugees were forced south into the sands of Thanalan, where they at last managed to find a degree of succor, either at the gates of Ul'Dah or, for those unable to adapt to Ul'Dan custom, a new home in southern Thanalan. For those that remained in Ul'Dah, some few managed to eke out a living there. Rauban Alden is a legendary example of this. He who was mistakenly imprisoned as an Imperial spy and sentenced to a grim fate in Ul'Dah's fighting pits, only to rise above his humble beginnings, purchase the famed Colosseum outright with his many winnings, and claim a seat at the Syndicate. Or Adalberta Stern, who followed in her father's footsteps in Ul'Dah's vibrant mining industry, and rose to become the head of its Miners' Guild. But for every Alden and every Stern, there are countless more who live and die in wretched squalor. Walk down Pearl Lane or step outside the city through the Gate of Nald, and you will see true poverty and misery, teeming masses of the poor and destitute who must beg and scrabble for every bit of food, drink, and shelter just to see the next sunrise. Many, you will notice, are of Highlander Hjor descent. That Pearl Lane is adjacent to the splendorous Sapphire Avenue exchange is a bitter irony indeed. Those who are so ill-fortunate, be they an exiled son of Alamigo or a native Ul'Dan down on her luck, are given little regard by those who enjoy a more fortunate fate. For all of Ul'Dah's riches, there is a saying by some, that Ul'Dah's wealth is not limitless. Spend and spend and spend on these hungry mouths, says the pampered and wealthy merchant, and surely the city will come to ruin, never mind his own coffers. Nevertheless, recently the Sultana has enacted great measures to ensure the well-being of all those who reside in Ul'Dah. The reopening of the Saltery in Alamigo, under the purview of the throne, has provided refugees a chance to return home, begin anew. Meanwhile, carefully managed investment from Ul'Dah ensures that its merchants hand over their coin with glee, rather than with reluctance had the Sultana levied a tax or forced charity instead. There is much work left to alleviate the inequalities of wealth in Ul'Dah. Under the wise rule of Nanamo Ul'Namo, however, the city has taken major strides towards a future where all may prosper. For the Sultana has a favorite saying, "The true wealth of Ul'Dah lies in the health, happiness, and hope of her people." Ul'Dah's reputation as a mercantile power is, of course, renowned throughout the Star, with certain Ul'Dan interests even having an embassy as far east as Kugane. On Sapphire Avenue, near the city's Gate of Thal, there is the Sapphire Avenue Exchange, the busiest market in the city. There, almost anything that can be bought or sold can be found somewhere in a merchant's stalls or warehouse. The city's strategic location cements its seat upon Eorzea's merchant throne. Among the currently extant city-states, only Ul'Dah and Limsa Lominsa have major ports, while Ul'Dah is situated closer to the east, and thus better situated to exploit trade routes in any direction. Limsa Lominsa might have its ships, but Ul'Dah is hardly incapable of hiring them, and it is better suited to exploit land caravans. Though there are many trading companies and houses in Ul'Dah, the largest and wealthiest among them is no doubt the East Aldenar Trading Company, helmed by Lord Lodorito himself. The company boasts a number of famed brands, such as the Sunsilk Tapestries and Estame's Lapidaries, which in turn grants the company chairman access to two of Ul'Dah's foremost guilds. The exchange of goods for coin is not Ul'Dah's sole industry. Perhaps second only to its mercantile activities is Ul'Dah's famed mining companies, foremost among them the Amagina & Sons mineral concern. Where Vilbrand is famed for its iron, Thanalan has long been rich in minerals of the precious kind. Those ores and uncut gems unearthed by its stalwart and clever miners are hauled back to the city, often through its extensive railroad system, and the many goldsmiths of Ul'Dah smelt, cut, and polish the raw substance into trinkets of glimmering beauty, and more besides. Many of these precious metals and jewelry make their way to the city's textile industry, with Thanalan's denizens long having needed good cloth to ward off the harsh rays of the sun, and now possessing the coin to indulge in fine clothing. Ul'Dah is one of the realm's leaders in fashion, rivaled perhaps only by the leather workers of Gridania. Its alchemists and healers, meanwhile, produce cures sold throughout the realm, with Ul'Dah alchemy serving a crucial role in saving Gridania from the creeping death that devastated the Forest Realm's hero population. And last, but certainly not least, are Ul'Dah's legendary entertainment venues. Those flush with coin and tired of spending them on food, drink, and fashion might go and purchase some time with Ul'Dah's beautiful and sensual dancers, or patronize the gambling halls of the Platinum Mirage. The Colosseum, a fighting pit deep in the heart of the city, is host to gladiators and pugilists seeking to win skill, fame, or fortune in its bloody sands, while patrons place bets on the victor. The Gold Saucer is no doubt the most famous among these entertainments. The glimmering jewel of the southern Thanalan deserts, it is a grand hall owned by the Manderville and Manderville Company, filled with games of skill and chance, staffed by workers both mundane and supernatural, shall we say. Its master, Godbert Manderville, is ever on the lookout for novelties from across the star, and I was shocked and no less delighted to see Eorzeans playing Doman Mahjong. I confess that I could not help but play a round or two during my time there. All Eorzean city-states are adherents to the realm's faith in the 12. Among its neighbors, Ul'Dah's adherence to their patron deity, Nalthal the Traitor, is surely second only to Ishgard's fervent worship of Halone the Fury. As Ul'Dahns seek prosperity in life and in the world beyond, it is hardly surprising that they make entreaties to the two-aspected god, praying for success in the mortal coil and for a comfortable resting place in the afterlife. Most prominent among the trader's religious orders is the aptly named Order of Nalthal. They are clergy and scholars both, carrying out the sacred rites of their god, as well as delving into the wisdom of the stars, history, and the arcane. It is of no surprise that the Thaumaturgers Guild, some of the last inheritors of the secrets of Old Mach, make their home within the order. Ul'Dah is, of course, no slouch in military matters, having survived civil wars and invasions by the Garlean Empire. The nature of its men and women at arms, however, are somewhat unique, even by the eclectic standards of Eorzean armies. There is the Sultan Sworn, an order of warriors oath-bound to protect the royalty of Ul'Dah. Clad in glimmering steel and bearing swords and shields, their loyalty to the throne is reminiscent of the staunch loyalty that our samurai owe to their liege lords. As of late, however, the Sultan Sworn have dwindled into a shadow of their former glory. Their numbers are few, their authority is diminished, and their bright reputation has been tarnished by the loss of their treasured blade, Oathkeeper. And in the taverns and back alleys, whispers abound that their fall was not a natural one, but brought by the hands of those who would see the throne's power weakened. Those of Dolma who have heard of Ul'Dah might know of its grand company, the Immortal Flames, those stalwart warriors formerly under the command of the legendary Rauban Alden. And if Ul'Dah has anything resembling a standing army, it would be the Flames. They deserve a tale of their own at a later time, but suffice it to say that the Immortal Flames are one of the few military units that are under the de facto control of the Sultana, by way of her close relationship with the company's commanding Flame General. The rest of Ul'Dah's armed forces are a mixed array of mercenary bands. The Brass Blades, marked by their red-trimmed chainmail and the eye-obscuring visors they wear under their turbans, provide internal security for the city, guarding against thieves and bandits alike. Though it is common knowledge that they serve not justice, nor the divans that govern them, but the interest of whoever holds the heaviest bag of coin, often Lord Lolorito. The Stone Torches, meanwhile, is a company founded by Chairman Fergeist of the Amagina and Sons, formed primarily to protect the interests holding throughout Thanalan, but often assisting the Immortal Flames in military ventures as needed. In the past, mercenaries of both these companies often clashed with the scaled Amalja peoples from Thanalan's east and south, as Ul'Dah caravans and travelers were favored targets for their raids, though peace between the city and the children of Ifrit is beginning to settle across the realm. I confess, it was difficult for me at times to pen this tale. My first true memory of the city was feeling the first glimmer of hope since fleeing Doma on a leaking ship. As we sailed into Vesper Bay, on the verge of death from sickness and hunger, we were desperate that the Golden City would grant our kin succor. And when we were told that Ul'Dah would accept no more refugees, it was as if the Sultana herself had plunged a blade into our hearts. At the time, I could not understand. Was the city not flowing with gold and treasures? Could they not harbor just a few more hungry mouths who have nowhere else to go? Was all of Eorzea this heartless, this cruel? It took me some time to regather my thoughts and view the city on its own terms, rather than through a haze of bitter despair. After learning more of the city and its circumstances, I found it harder to fully blame the Sultana for turning the children of Doma away. Much of the wealthier citizenry was already furious at the Alamigan refugee population, and with the Sultana in a vulnerable state, politically speaking, to extend the hand to Doma might have courted disaster for all. Or, that is what I tell myself when I think back to my comrades who perished during our flight to Eorzea. For all the bitter memories for me that this city harbors, however, I believe it is beginning to change. It now faces what is surely its greatest test yet. Will its desire for coin outweigh the prosperity of its people, all its people, great and small? The ragged homes of the impoverished that line the city walls and Pearl Lane could well be a vision of what is to come should the city fail to break away from old habits. And yet, each day I hear of new enactments from the Sultana improving the livelihoods of the city's poor. News of peace talks with the Amalja, mutterings that nowadays Nanamo Ul'Namo speaks with a clear voice and determination in her posture, a timid princess no longer, but now a true queen. It will not be an easy thing for Ul'Dah to make a different choice, not when its current path of riches would tempt any man or woman to remain upon it. But as I sit in its taverns and listen to its people speak, the voices I hear are laden with hope for new ventures and opportunities on the horizon, not enterprises to fill already full coffers ever further, but to better lives and to raise the downtrodden. Perhaps there will come a day when another band of hapless refugees will come begging at the city gates, and on that day, Ul'Dah will surely stretch forth the hand of generosity. They will, no doubt, find true happiness.